Hey guys, section 1.4 is the rise of the new monarchs. I got a haircut. No, it feels great. So this section, the impact of the printing press, the Northern Renaissance, we mentioned both of those things before. And then we'll talk about the rise of the new monarchs, what those are, and this guy named Machiavelli, political power. Again, your standards are on the top left. I don't know what else. Doctor Who fans represent. There used to be cookies in there. No cookies. Disappointing. Okay, so here we go. The menu. We're going to look at the role of the printing press in the Northern Renaissance, the intellectual differences between the Italian and Northern Renaissance, how they kind of think differently in these different places, characteristics of the new monarchs with examples, and Machiavelli and the Prince, how a political leader should act. So basically that's what the gist. It's a big section. I might go a little bit longer here, but we'll try to get through things as quickly as possible. Of course, that printing press is really important. Just a reminder, mid-15th century. Instead of copying books hand to hand, now you have books with printed pages. You can print them faster. And then these books also can be printed in the language which the common people speak. So now, assuming you can read, you can be taught to read, now knowledge can be spread a lot quicker. Johann Gutenberg is the man behind the invention. Western Europe, we should point out, and remember, the Chinese were ahead of Western Europe by about 400 years. So, in any case, 1450, Western Germany. But as you see, as the years go on, they start to spread, and you get more and more of these printing presses in European cities. Notice where you're going to have the collection of them, where you have multiple cities close together with the printing press. They're coalescing, well, it's a word, around, obviously, Italy. Growth of learning, the rebirth of knowledge and creativity, boom, a renaissance, at least the spread of a renaissance. You're also going to see, in looking for patterns, coalescing around two other areas, southern Germany and what we call the Low Countries, which would be the Netherlands and Belgium today. They form the backbone, these two geographic areas, of what becomes known as the Northern Renaissance. Obviously, it's a Renaissance time, but the focus of the Northern Renaissance is very different than in Italy. The goal of the Northern Renaissance is to understand what early church writers meant in terms of the writings. A lot of that is found in the Bible. Not all of it is found in the Bible. You have early church writings from other sources. But the idea, the big picture is, how does mankind relate to God? What is that relationship like, and how can mankind harness its potential to perhaps be much more of a religious figure? So it's a lot bigger, like, religious. Let's say this: it's much less secular than in Italy, because in Italy you're focusing on Greek and Roman manuscripts. You're focusing the art on recalling ideas from antiquity with the Roman and Greek gods. You don't see any of that in the North. In the North, the ideology is focused on religion. Ironically, the art in the Northern Renaissance is not fully on religion. You also have princes paying for pieces of art that showcase secular life in their kingdom. So remember, peasant wedding, those pieces by Bruegel showcase life in the Northern Renaissance and how it might differ from the Italian Renaissance or in Italy. So that's kind of the difference ideology between the two. And again, the Northern Renaissance, you have the spread of that printing press, which helps spread nationalist vernacular literature. So here we go. We've got a map of Europe in about the year 1500. And what you might notice is you have certain countries which, if you look at a map of Europe today, are basically blown up into a million pieces. We call those states decentralized states, which basically, it's like that example again. Imagine the United States without Washington, D.C. You have 50 states, same culture. Okay, key point here. Same culture, same language, same religious faith in many cases, and yet there is no top political structure to bind you all together. It's all individual little pieces. You have that in what was at this point Germany and Italy. In Germany, we call that the Holy Roman Empire. We'll get to that in a minute. But I want you to also notice in this map of 1500, we do have some centralized states, England, France, and Spain, and to a lesser extent Portugal. By 1500, have centralized into one country, primarily thanks to what we call the new monarchs. Okay, the rise of the new monarchs in the late 15th and early 16th century, the late 1400s, the early 1500s. These are the men and women that are going to drive this centralization of power in these countries so that you don't have 50 different states. You have one government at the top executing their ideas, and they trickle down from there. So we're looking also primarily, as you can see here, in Western Europe. Now, the thing about AP Euro is that our first three units are basically happening simultaneously. So there are things that we're going to mention here with these new monarchs that we're going to get to in Unit 3. We get to exploration, because a lot of the monarch's power comes from the riches that come from exploration, and with money comes power, as you're going to see later as well. Well, I mean, you know that already, if you have not been living under a rock. So, in any case, this is a kind of a culmination of things in the first three units. Oh, gosh, the king. Not a huge fan of the king. I don't know about you. Let's see. I'm going to kind of come close here. You know, I don't like to have sponsors of the Padeos. I don't like to get, but just nobody's watching, just between you and me. I don't really like Burger King. Not a huge fan. I think the king's part of that. So I'm sorry if you're like, if you work there, you're heir to the Burger King fortune, but I don't like Burger King. Okay, so here we go. The new monarchs. Characteristics. What do they do? What are their tactics to grabbing power? First thing they do is they tax everybody. Okay? They tax everybody, and they have a monopoly on that. So there's not many people or different people in the country who are collecting tax money. It's all coming to the king. They have a military force with muscle, and they dispense justice. They're the ones that decide how the law is applied. So really, what more would you want? You get all the money, you give out all the judgment, and you have muscle to make people do what you say. I mean, what more would you want? So in order to get that, we're going to look at different things they do, even more specifically, but I want us to remember this, and we'll be referencing this a lot already. Let's see if I can get this right. Here we go. This is our social pyramid in the late medieval period, and if we notice, there's one thing I've forgotten on this pyramid. Let me get it real quick. And that is that the clergy have, or the church has, almost unlimited power. They're not even considered in the worldly socioeconomic class, but not the nobles, the kings are going to start doing that, because in their countries, they're going to do two things. One, many kings are going to start naming church officials in their own country's church. So where the Pope did that before, now the kings are going to just take care of that. The second thing, and this is more important, we'll see this in Unit 2, is that political leaders start to decide what the religious faith is going to be in their countries. They're going to decide. First Amendment, it's not happening. They're establishing religion in their country and saying, we're going to be Catholic, or we're going to be Lutheran or Calvinist. We'll get to that later. That takes the clergy and knocks them down several notches. Another thing that they do is they create more efficient bureaucracies, government servants. Can't talk. People who do the work of the government. So think of the lady who will be at desk when you go to get your permit and fills out all the paperwork. The government servants and these monarchs give these powers and responsibilities to the merchants, the middle class. We also call them, this is a term to know, the bourgeoisie. Okay, it's a French word for the middle class. They let those men and women, mostly men, do the work of government so that, in theory, they become more influential, and that takes away powers from the nobility. Here's the thing. Power is, you can't go to the power tree, okay? You can't create powers. We're not talking like, we'll get you some coal. No, we're not talking about that. We're saying that if one group gets more powerful and influence, somebody's got to lose it. So the thought process is, if the merchants gain by getting these government jobs, the nobility then will lose. Now you ask, well, okay, that's the nobles that may not have, remember those regional things that they could do under the feudal system. They had basically, they could do whatever they want on their manor. Now these merchants are going to be doing the work of the central government, taking those powers away. So you ask, well, what about the knights? They're right there too. Well, here's the thing. Military technology has changed the way that warfare occurs. Knights with swords, that's so medieval, right? Get out of the Middle Ages. The new monarchs are going to use new military technology to change the way wars are fought. There's a greater reliance on infantry, standing armies. So you have an army that basically is on call at any time you want. That usually, in the Middle Ages, people come fight, they go home, they farm. Now you're going to have professional soldiers. If they're professional, they got to get paid. Where do they get paid? The tax money. Okay, so that's it. It's all connected. So you have these standing armies, but they're using guns that are, well, they're using guns, right? Muzzle-loading firearms. It's going to take away the ability for swords to determine warfare. And also, if you think the Middle Ages, you might think castles. Well, guess what? Now we have mobile cannon. You know, roll that thing around, shoot it away. That's terrible terminology. And now, well, castle walls gone. So all this thing is to say that monarchs use this military technology to take power from the competing noble class. Those nobles get a hole up in their castles in the Middle Ages, but no more. I mean, they can't do that. So those knights, in many ways, become the professional soldiers that serve the king. The merchants are grateful for their government positions that serve the king. The clergy and the nobility are moving down, and the king is that much more powerful. So let's talk about an example of new monarchs. And hey, two's better than one. Let's talk about Ferdinand and Isabella. Spanish king and queen marry in the year 1478 and unite two Spanish kingdoms together to make Spain. Okay, so you had Aragon, you had Castile, they get married, and then bam, we have united Spain. Now, we'll talk much more in Unit 3 about them funding the voyages of Columbus, but they're the ones who are paying up the money for Columbus to go try to find a new route to the Indies. Remember those trade routes, and the Italians were like owning and having a monopoly on those? Well, countries are going to start to want to find their own way, and we'll get to that story later. They also have what's called the Reconquista. And in order to ensure that everyone is following your rule, that everything is pointed up to the king, in this case Ferdinand and Isabella, you got to make sure and take away all the differences that could create, I guess, what's the word? Conflict between people. One of those is religious differences. So Ferdinand and Isabella, Christian, Catholic monarchs, order that all religious minorities, Jews and Muslims, or in Spain we call them Moors, are kicked out of the country. That has a financial detriment on the country, although that's going to be kind of overshadowed by all the money that comes in because of exploration. But in any case, the goal here of the Reconquista is to say we're going to make sure that all, I guess, chances for conflict by religion are taken away. And to ensure that that stays, we establish what's called the Inquisition, which basically is Spain saying that we've got to make sure that everybody follows religious ways. And we'll kind of look at that a little bit next unit, what the Inquisition is. Now, with these monarchs, pray to Euro, you're not going to have to know everybody's name. You're not going to have to know every king of England. There's probably 10 to 15 monarchs that at some point, maybe not even that many, but you're going to have to know about. And some of them are even more important. And this guy, Charles V, would fit the bill. Charles V is the grandson of Ferdinand and Isabella. His last name, his royal name, is Habsburg. Okay? So, like the Queen of England today, they're the Windsors. Okay? You never call them that, but that's kind of their family name. Charles V is a Habsburg. He is the King of Spain. He's also elected as the Holy Roman Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. So basically that's an elected position, giving him symbolic power over the HRE. He is the real deal. We'll talk about him a lot more next unit, but this is a guy that you're going to have to know and his kind of position in early 16th century Europe. Now, he commands what's called the Holy Roman Empire. Guess what? That doesn't really mean much, because what the HRE is basically 300 states that don't have a Washington, D.C. bringing them together. So all of Charles V's power is symbolic. Each state has its own foreign policy. They fight their own wars. This is not a new monarchy, okay? Because he doesn't have the control and the power to levy taxes, raise armies. He depends on the goodwill of the princes who are in each of these states. Now, many of them will follow what he says because they recognize his authority. Guess who puts this pretty little crown on him? That's right, the Pope. So many of these princes know that the Pope is the real deal. Okay, so they're going to recognize his authority, but there is no legal basis to it. And as you see here, the HRE is an absolute mess in terms of centralizing power, because every little state does its own thing, has its own authority, has its own wars, foreign policy, tax system, yet culturally they're all the same. So we call this the Holy Roman Empire. It's a major player throughout the first fourth of our class. But understand its political structure. Also understand that one day all these little states might say, you know what, let's be on the same political team. And guess what happens then? They unite and become a country called Germany. But that happens way down the road. This also shows you how much control that Charles V had. Remember, he's the King of Spain. He also has land in the Low Countries, what we'll call the Netherlands, the southern part of Italy, several islands. He is a powerful figure, and yet in the HRE he is not what we call a new monarch. So his power extends past even what the pyramid implies. Now, let me pause for 1 second because I have to address something real quick, but then we'll finish up with the prince here in a second. All right, I'm back again. So the prince, how should a monarch behave? What should they do? Well, guess what? This guy named Niccolo Machiavelli, year 1517, I want to say, writes a book called The Prince that tries to establish what a king or monarch should do. He writes this book at a time when political power is either inherited or stolen. So there's no democratic system in the 16th century. If you're going to get power, you either have to get it from your papa or you steal it from somebody else. It's basically the way things work, and there's Sheldon Cooper here. Now, the major tenets of his philosophy is the ends justify the means. Do whatever it takes to keep or maintain power. Image is everything, and it is better to be feared than loved. Arguably, all these policies are still followed today in our political world, but if you tell a leader, hey, the end game, here's basically the story. The end game is to stay in charge. So, whatever you have to do to keep yourself at the top of this pyramid and to keep others from coming up at you, you're going to do it. It doesn't matter what it is. Be creative. That needs to happen. So that's kind of the core basis of Machiavelli's ideas. Is it followed perfectly today? No, because the context of political leadership, especially in our side of the world, is different. However, there's bits and pieces of it, say image is everything, that is certainly similar. That ends 1.4. Remember the menu of the things that we need to know. Also, be internalizing this pyramid, because again, you got to know the world context, the social context, to get how these different sections change over time, something we'll kind of look at as time goes along. So that ends 1.4. We'll be back with 1.5 here shortly. Peace.